Very good morning. Hi there, Aditi.
Hey Manan.
Good to have you with us. I'll just start about what the learning series stands for and what Arch has been up to over the years. Today's talk is about, as I think your area of expertise lies within graphics, and a lot of work that you've done over the year is in and around graphics and different tools and techniques to use and explore, also looking at indigenous ways as well as other methods that are used outside to bring forth a new perspective, I feel. So I'd love to hear that from you. And so a craft-driven design practice to bring about a social impact is what we're going to hear from you today about. So I'd like to welcome all the listeners who are going to join us for the learning series. And so about Arch. Arch was set up in the year 2000 under the Arch Educational Society. And the intent was to reform, transform the quality of education for design aspirants across the globe. We've been the nucleus of innovation, design-centric interactions and activities since its inception in the past 22 years. And we're in the 23rd year now. And our emphasis is not only on the quality of education, but also on the development of necessary skills and integration of entrepreneurship within our curriculum towards building new age thought leaders and growing the community of 7,000 plus alumni of Arch across the globe. If I talk about the learning series, we started the first series back when we were doing the design culture conference, which was held in March. We had representation from almost 10 plus countries in form of research papers and presentations. And after COVID, it was interesting to have everybody come here. And as a part of that, during COVID, we started hosting the Design Culture Learning Series. And there we had 4 topics, 4 sub-themes, creativity 5.0, society, harmonious livability, and then social impact also. And this time we have 12 speakers. So thank you for contributing within the learning series. The Design Culture Learning Series is a step towards bringing thought leaders and leading design practitioners towards fostering design culture among the aspirants of creative and innovative fraternity for a better in this presently vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous VUCA world. So in this learning series, as I said, we have 12 speakers, and the second series of has begun. So Aditi, you're a graphic designer, a visual artist, and a book artist. Your work's been exhibited widely both in India, abroad, and on leading design forums. You graduated with a master's in visual communication from IDC IIT Bombay in 2007. Then you went on to pursue a specialized course in book arts to Florence, Italy. Aditi's established her design studio in 2013 with 2 professional verticals, communication design and book arts, in the city of Lakes, Udaipur, located in the Mewar region of Rajasthan. Aditi trained her team of artisans in traditional book binding, screen printing, and paper folding techniques, and the studio specializes in creating unique handcrafted solutions. So, bringing forth the social impact as to reminding us of the culture that we came from. I think that is very, very crucial to bring back that knowledge. So amazing that. Aditi's studio has worked with organizations like the City Palace of Udaipur, Harvard Business School, Wellspun IIT Bombay, IIM Udaipur, to name a few, and her works are in collection with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Rhode Island Library, Center of Book Arts, New York, and many private collections. So welcome, Aditi, on book. I think our listeners are very, very excited to hear you speak about what you've been up to.
To sort of bring in more context to my practice, I'd like to begin with Manan has given a great introduction. I'll thank him again for it. But I'll still sort of go through a detailed journey of my education so that everybody understands why I take on the projects that I do at the studio and why we sort of practice the way we do. So my undergrad degree is in applied arts, but a lot of my friends were actually in fine arts. So I ended up spending a lot of my time in the fine art studios because of them. And so my learnings were very much greater and deeper because I was, also practicing painting, and I was working with their assignments on sculpting, printmaking, photography, developing the films. Of course, parallelly also doing my own assignments, right, which were like campaign design, again, like understanding typography, um, photography, illustration, so on and so forth. From there on, I went to pursue my master's in visual communication. I went to IDC, IIT Bombay, and it was a very open school, and we were very blessed to sort of have the professors we did, and the colleagues and friends and the space that IIT Bombay is, because it was such an open-minded space that we were able to I was able to really interact with a lot of interesting people, self-learners. So that was very motivating. I also sort of was able to explore subjects like visual design, so identity design, game design, interaction design, theater, animation, illustration, so on and so forth. So it was like a great impact on me in terms of the conversations, and we would not just say stick to design, but we would also have conversations and debates on larger aspects of the society, and the political understanding of the country, or the global understanding of different subjects, right? During my tenure at IDC, there was one module. There were actually two that really deeply impacted me. One was on game design, and one was on Indian thoughts and philosophy, which kind of made me completely circle back to my own roots, right? And to actually understand better, deeper, research more, ask more questions, more relevant questions, um, in that regard. And one particular module, which was on book design, we had a professor visiting from the US, and it was a very interesting module where he taught us book design through first crafting the book. And it was such an interesting part of that entire module that it stayed very strongly with me. And because, before this, I had put my hands in everything, literally, because, I would be somebody very interested in a subject and take it on for a couple of months and realize that, okay, I've learned, and then I want to move on to something else. Books was something that sort of, I wanted to test myself if I'm really interested in that subject or not. So I decided to make books, and I made one book a day, if not more, for 1 year. And I realized that I'm really getting more and more interested and keen in this subject. So then I found out this school in Florence, Italy. It's a traditional printmaking school, and I went and studied book arts there. But along with book arts, again, that space was so interesting that we were doing things like building our own cameras, and understanding the textile nuances, how visiting these workshops of the master makers, and how their journey sort of how detailed their journey is and how nuanced their practice is, really. So that, of course, impacted me a lot. I got back to Udaipur, my hometown, and I established my studio in 2013. Since then, we've been practicing two professional verticals, and I've been practicing two personal verticals as well, which I'll come to. But one is communication design and one is book arts. What I want to begin with is in terms of project sharing. I want to begin with more book arts projects, and then I'll come to communication design. The first project that I got the opportunity to work on when I established my studio was with the City Palace of Udaipur. So this was like a very important project for my practice, for my understanding, and where I want to take my studio to. So during this project, it's called Holika Dahan. During Holika Dahan festival, the City Palace hosts multiple master makers of Mewar, and they invite a designer from outside to sort of intervene and to understand, observe, understand the traditional practices, and to be able to sort of intervene and bring about products which are more contemporary and which are more context driven in the present time. Right?
It's like an intervention.
Right. So I was also lucky to be working on this project for 2 months. And in the period of 2 months, I designed, in communication design terms, I designed the event communication to actually be the person who was the design intervention to that entire process, and then create a report. So we were 11 of us, 10 makers, master makers from Mewar, And one, Peter, who's a very established artist in the UK, a sculptor, he was visiting Udaipur that time, and we included him in the workshop. What was very interesting was the entire process, because first I was supposed to, I kind of like was just observing. So in the 2 month period, I visited all the master maker studios, just listened to them, their stories, their journeys, understood their relationship with their craft, why they are carrying forward these generational practices, and meanwhile also understanding how their interpersonal relationships are within, because they've been practicing their crafts, respective crafts, for many years, and they have built a community within themselves, right? Also, it was interesting to see that how Peter was sort of, like without having to know any Mewari or Hindi, he was like being part of the entire process and how he was participating in the conversations. We covered folk art, puppet making, sculpting, terracotta, book binding, then a tikri art, so on and so forth. So these discussions were enriching. And after, the second part was more about sort of discussing with the makers then, how do we all come together and sort of build on ideas which are more contemporary? How do we like start just making it an easy process of creating each other first? So the stone puppets, the stone sculptures that you see in the puppet form are basically participants of the workshop, right? So it was a very interesting sort of like conversation icebreaker. uh, then what I want to bring to this project, what I want to highlight here is the fact that the City Palace actually acknowledges the makers beautifully. Like one, they really host this entire event properly. Then by the end, there is it's a 3-day event, and there is an inauguration to the event where everything which was created during the event is sort of on display for the local citizens of Mewar and Udaipur and the tourists visiting, and of course the makers' families. There's also facilitation at the end of the process, which is very important to the makers as they understand that City Palace sort of, holds sort of a strong bond with them and wants to carry forward these practices and support them during these transformations, right? Um, what we created during the explorations, I'll sort of like talk a little bit about that. We were able to create these experiments. Like we started with creating Saraswati ji, and goddess Saraswati in terracotta is done in a particular style. But when Jamna Lalji, who was a master maker of terracotta, got in touch with Peter, and their conversations are more uh, observation based than language based. And what was the result was like creating the signature face that Peter has in his sculptures that you see on the screen, uh, for goddess Saraswati, which we usually don't see in our practices. So that was an interesting exploration. The second manifestation I want to talk about is this very interesting sort of um, uh, dinner set that we created. So we created 2 sets, and the brief was absolutely the same in terms of we have to create a contemporary dinner set inspired by the form of lotus. It would be created in terracotta, but the end result was 2 different art craft forms. One is an art form, one is a craft form. Miniature painting done on this, and tikri craft done creating this same set. So same brief, but different results and different manifestations. So it was a very interesting process for me and for all of us to sort of observe and see what the end result was with the same brief, right? Context, time, everything. The last product that I want to talk about that we created here was like a combination of folk art and book binding. We wanted to create these modern fur paintings. So fur traditionally would be like like a long piece of fabric that an artist and a storyteller would take from village to village, and their assistant would like sort of light up one part of it, and they would narrate the painted stories, right? But that practice is now very remote and very scarce. Over the years, it has sort of faded away. So we wanted to bring that practice alive again in a different form. So we wanted to create these calendars, which were very visual narratives and calendars that become like pocket books for you that you carry with you, exactly the way the traditional practice was to carry the paintings with them from one place to another. So this was a result of that conversation and that idea. I'll talk about one now. Moving forward, I want to talk about one product that we create at the studio. So I was, of course, very inspired by this entire journey and the idea to sort of, in my practice, work with more collaborations, work with more local makers. And how do we sort of like, become a community where we support each other and we are able to take, all of us are able to take the crafts one step forward. So the product that I'll talk about actually is 5 crafts within one coming together. The first is book binding, which is what we practice at the studio. So I have trained a team of artisans, and we bind different kinds of books and different forms of bindings. We practice different forms of binding. And the second one was cotton fabric, right? Like the homegrown cotton fabric. So during this research, I studied the history of cotton in India, the social, political understanding of it, and what was the impact on community and the makers because of this. So that was a very enlightening process for us overall as a studio. The third craft that we include is handmade paper. And these are papers created from the cotton waste that comes from the textile industry. So again, I think like a sustainable practice in itself, and supporting another craft and moving forward to another craft, right? An entire circle. The next 2 crafts that were included in the product were indigo dipping, indigo dyeing, and hand block printing. So there is a village close to 40 kilometers from Udaipur, and a very inspiring village where they practice traditional indigo dyeing and hand block printing. What you see in the images is like a hot process with using tar printing and then dipping the fabric into indigo to create the result of what you see on your left side of the screen, which is the fetia lehenga that they create. The result of all of these practices coming together is a simple but yet very powerful product, which is like a handcrafted sketchbook, completely inspired by Mewar and Udaipur, because it's the city of lakes. It's also known as a white city, sandwiched between like the sky and the water, right? So this is what you see, like a sandwiched city between the blue. The motive that you see on top is like that of a triangle, which is representative of the Aravalli mountain ranges that we are surrounded with. And the binding, particularly I use this binding, which basically brings all the folios, the 10 folios that you see in the image together, right? And the idea was to say that, hey, we bring together multiple crafts and all of us create a beautiful product together. It's not like one journey and one person and one idea at all. More experiments carrying that idea forward is these fabrics from an organization called Avran, based locally in Udaipur, and our collaboration with them with hand block printing and their fabrics. And
they work with Indigo, right?
They work in Indigo.
Avran, yeah.
And
there was a very interesting thing that I saw in the one that you showed before, that the flip was missing in the middle. Like you binded it in 2 parts, but you left the center empty.
Right.
Like to talk a little bit about it, just piquing my curiosity.
I think the exposed binding. So there is this. This is a variation of this binding, right? It's an Ethiopian binding, and you could actually do it as like the entire spine could be covered. But why I wanted to sort of leave that window is to talk about how this binding brings together different folios. The entire idea, the concept of bringing crafts together. So there's a little window into that world of sharing, right? And of like coming together. And it's a very subtle window. Like if you receive this product, it's not like immediately you will get to know that there are 5 crafts that you're holding, with one product. But that is a beauty of the conversation and community building, where we talk about exactly how you sort of raise this question, that why this window, right? So it brings about this beautiful connection and conversation with somebody to talk about what every aspect really means. So yeah, so the other bindings that we practice are like pamphlet binding, Japanese tab binding, long stitch, so on and so forth. There are two more genres that we work within the realm of book arts. One, what you saw were like the bindings. Then we work with something called the artist books. Now, artist books are limited edition books which are handcrafted, hand painted, done particularly on a certain concept or an idea. This book was created in collaboration with an artist, with two artists, Anne and Sue. They are based in the US and Denmark. Three of us got together and we worked on this poem written by Rabindranath Tagore, Unending Love. What this project brought was an extremely deep understanding of the process of paper making. Each paper that you see on the screen is actually, there is the jalis on the paper are not painted on top or created or printed on top. They are actually created in the pulp of the paper. So there was a beautiful understanding and daring, and this project took me to New York for 2 months. The project was completed there, and it's in the collection of Metropolitan Museum of Art. So like every part that you see here, the project was called Khela, which is the Bengali word for to play, and the colors that you see on these on the papers, right? This is all pulp. Only the graphic, the motive of the man and the woman in the Kama Sutra series that you see is painted on top. It's miniature painting, but the color of the paper is created through pulp. So it was a very, very rewarding process to understand how just working with one material and deeply understanding the process of that material, skill, method, and process and material itself can transform an entire project. Very simple but very powerful to learn this. The next project is something where I was able to sort of align the two verticals together, which is book arts and communication design. So initially we were working on it, like say separately, but slowly I was able to align with projects like this. This was an invitation design created for a Kathak performer, Mrinal Pawar, for her performance that particular evening. So what we brought together was, we created illustrations that we practiced at the studio. We created screen printed prints that we again practiced at the studio, a book craft, and this was completely designed, taking as a communication design project. So how do we combine two practices and create results which are then unique and then can impact not only the artisans, but also the receivers, right? The value is more received on all ends. Taking this project forward, because this relationship grew for both of us into a beautiful friendship. And during the pandemic, we really wanted to sort of do something to take arts forward. And we wanted to take that project forward in a way where we just talk about another one aspect, which is just the hand mudras. And what do the hand mudras mean in the dance form of Kathak? And how do they represent the life in itself, right? This was one of the biggest projects that we took on, where during the year, lack of resources and, given the times, we were able to create like these editions. And this was the result. It's an edition of, it's like a coffee table book, but it's completely handcrafted. So you could call it an artist book, you can call it a coffee table book. You can actually put it together like a half moon and place it in a box, or you could display it like a full moon. It talks about the circular nature of life, circular nature of everything, life and death, day and night, a practice for that matter. So, and again, screen printed at the studio. There were custom 10,000 circular papers made for this, and we were to screen print. And if somebody understands the process, they know alignment is so important in that process. So to align 10,000 decal-edged circular papers to one part was like a great learning and a great challenge for us to take on.
Yeah.
Moving forward, this is like the third genre that we practice in the vertical of book arts. It's called altered books, where you completely deconstruct the book and look at it as an object of art, right? So this was a commission for Mr. Amitabh Bachchan's 70th birthday. And the brief I received was that he reads portions of Gita and Ramayana every morning. And he wanted to sort of, the person who commissioned us wanted to bring that aspect together for him. And what you see is the paintings with Mangilalji, who's like a master artist of carver and folk art paintings in Mewar. And with after many dialogues and discussions, we were able to reach consensus as to what doors we want to paint, right? We wanted to create like a window, a door into his world and his inner world, like that. The sculpture that you see in between the altered book, it's called the Circle of Life, inspired by Gita, where, a lot of times you question your life, you question why, you're waking up, you're going about your work, you're going about your day in a similar way. And what are you really bringing about in this world? And so this is actually an original Gita with like a Sanskrit script. And each page was like each day of his life, right? Like you're waking up and you're doing a similar process. You're similarly binding the book, but folding the paper. But at the end, you get a magnificent result and quite in resonance with his life. The impression that you leave on somebody, the experiences and your thoughts are very unique. I'd like to now talk about a little bit about like my team, the support system, and the challenges that we face at the studio, how it impacts everyone. So my
That will be
family.
my next question. I feel like you read, you read my mind. Yeah.
So yeah, like my brother's not in this picture, but my parents are, and my brother doesn't like to be photographed. But they have been like solid pillars for me and my practice, to guide us, to actually be always there to support us whenever we needed help. And this is my current team that you see. We are 10 of us. One person's missing in the photograph, but yeah, 10 people coming together now. These are like my gurus and my friends who've supported me from like my IDC gurus, but they've like constantly been a support. Not only did they teach me, but they actually like I can still reach out to them whenever I'm in trouble. And I think that's like very important of anybody practicing into a design vertical, any form of design vertical, that you need your support system till you are able to reach clarity of where you want to go, who you want to work with, why you want to create what you want to create, right? Some of the challenges that I want to speak about is while in my process. To begin with, I wanted to come back to Udaipur and train artisans, local artisans here, and especially women artisans. Initially, I did not find it easy to kind of find people. There were more men working in this field, and I wanted to work with people who were already in this field, right? Paper making, paper folding, some sort of book binding, any craft. Unfortunately, in that entire duration, I realized that they have a certain way of practicing their craft. They have been trained in a certain way, and my practice was from Florence and in a very, very different way. The approach to the subject, the approach to materials, the approach to tools was very different. So for me, it became very challenging for me to teach them how to unlearn what they knew and to begin again. So eventually, what happened is that I had to start working with people with zero craft background, women who were just wanting to work, willing to work, and uh, but the other challenge that came with it is like they were educated till say 8th standard or 10th standard. But the point is that they say they're educated till 8th standard or 10th, but they don't have the knowledge, know-how, or the skill of say a student who's gone to 8th standard in a more say private school or another school, right? So to start from basics, teaching them mathematics, teaching them science, basic principles, then coming to the craft of it all, right? Others, of course, was like, I've been teaching for a decade, but I've been teaching in English. And it made me realize when I started my practice, I realized that, I can talk and teach in Hindi, but there are a lot of English words that I'm using in between. So while the artisans are also sort of, changing, they are also understanding words of English, but still they are more comfortable in the local dialect, like Mewari, right? they would understand it better. But I did not know how to converse fluently in Mewari. So that was a big challenge, but great learning process for me nonetheless. Then, of course, retention, right? Like knowledge retention is so important, because once you teach them, but are they able to practice it, and are they able to maintain the quality of it? So other challenges that we have is basically managing interpersonal relationships, of course managing holidays, because especially in Rajasthan, I think it's a state of festivities, and like people really like to celebrate, not only just Rajasthan, I think in India. So suddenly like they would just go for a festival, they would just disappear. And like especially when it came to women artisans, initially they were, if anything, in their house managing medical emergencies to festivities would come, they would like disappear for weeks together. So I did not know how to sustain my practice, because how do I take on a project when my team is not there? So then I had to balance my team, I had to balance my approach towards the craft itself. Then, of course, interpersonal relationships. I think it's with time you learn how to kind of manage what is a hierarchy. Do you want a flat structure in your studio, in your practice, or do you want a hierarchy? Who reports? What is the kind of delegation that you would want to do in your team? Then, of course, I think financial challenges, because it was such a unique project that I took on, like a craft. And once I came back to India, no studio as such was practicing this craft. I had nobody really to look up to, or to kind of approach and ask them, what should I be doing, or what journey should I be taking, right? So it was extremely challenging for me to carve my own path in terms of how do I take this passion and make it into like a practice, a sustainable practice, right? So it's been a very interesting journey. This is where I would want to actually bring in the communication design vertical of the studio, because it has been like a very strong pillar for us, to sort of support the other practice, the other vertical, right? A lot of the design projects we took on we were able to manage our expenses in the second part of the studio. So three specific projects I'd like to talk about. One is this organization called Dakshinam Saris, where we work with 28 clusters. It's a textile company. And what this journey has been very, very rewarding for me, from designing their identity to slowly designing their brand communication, to actually bringing about their, collaterals like stationery, website design, invoices, envelopes, very simple but very powerful tools of communication, to actually handling social media, to creating strategies. And interestingly, this project, the relationship became so strong that I was becoming part of the larger conversation on how the entire communication, entire outlook affects the clusters and affects the clients as well. How are the clients receiving, and how are we bridging the gap between the clients and the artisans, the makers? So I got into the interior spaces as well. How do we display? How do we talk about the motives, the history of the motives that have been being crafted on the handloom industry for so long? What is the importance? So beginning these conversations with the connoisseurs, with the clients, to designing, like from understanding like the furniture, how welcoming it needs to be, to the space, the color of the space, having a live loom at the store for the clients to come and interact, and to be able to understand how tedious the process is, how enriching the journey is of the artisans. The most recent idea that we're working on is creating these newsletters, where we're bringing in the element of animation, motion graphics, a little bit of illustrations, and how clients have these conversations, and how our conversations are never restricted to, hey, I like this design and I want to buy this sari. It is always about a social, political movement, our daily problems which are going on, and how it somehow sort of connects to one or the other craft of India. And how do we bridge that gap and bring that all in together? The second project that I want to talk about in communication design vertical is this book that I designed for the City Palace of Udaipur, where we brought in the calendars so City Palace of Udaipur was designing these calendars, and they were absolutely magnificently beautiful, hand-drawn, hand-painted, hand-calligraphed calendars, right? Because computers were not there. They were designed from 1987. So these calendars would go out every year to local citizens, to their, to their guests, to tourists. And it was such a beautiful part of, one aspect of Mewar would be included in a calendar every year. So they would either highlight the heroes of Mewar, the warriors, the textiles of Mewar. So when I got the project, I went through the entire content. The entire content was in Hindi. It was so beautiful, so engaging, and so interesting that I requested the palace if we could possibly consider to translate this into English as well, so that it is more accessible to a larger audience span, like globally, right? Because we have visitors from the globe to Udaipur. And how do we like create these, like, create anecdotes and nuances of these stories? So we were able to kind of achieve that. It took a long time, but we created this book with the Hindi version and the English version coming together. And yeah, like beautiful stories, beautifully like aspects of Meva coming together. The last project that I want to talk about in the communication design vertical is a project with Ahimsa Silk. This has been a very special project and more recent project for us, where we were able to sort of impact 266 households, from weavers to makers to farmers overall, right? So creating the identity to actually creating the entire cycle of how silk thread is produced. Silk thread comes out. So from all of their communication, what goes out, what comes in, and how do they practice, and what is their approach to life and their work. The most current project, what we're working on, is aligning all the two verticals I spoke about, the communication design and book arts. The two personal verticals that I work on are creating these art pieces, which are commissioned, or like, pieces that I've been invited to exhibitions to display at, and teaching. So I've been teaching in different design schools span India for like a decade now. And I wanted to align all of these practices together. So the new project is called Babel Fish. Babel Fish, if you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy by Adam Douglas, talks about how this tool is a translation, right? Translator becomes a translator. We want to be the translators of design language for everybody. We want to be able to break the idea of what design is in smaller parts, so that there's more access and tools and knowledge to everybody, and everybody can have a capability of design thinking, right? So this is where like my fine arts, book craft, teaching and design verticals are coming together. This is one of the first few visuals from the project. This is where you can reach me and reach the studio, really. But yeah, thank you for giving the time.
Thank you. I think there was a lot of cultural context for me, and I'm very sure for all the listeners who are joining us today on various platforms. And one of the most interesting things that I could see throughout the work that you've been doing is how well integrated your understanding of cultural connotation was, along with the craft practices that you're using within the studio, and how you're using both of them into actually communicating an outcome that translates both the things in a justified manner, which is usually what I feel that misses out in graphics that people create today, where it's coming from and where it's going and where does it belong.
Yeah.
So that is something that is very clear in the work that you've shared with us today, and I think it's very inspiring for everybody. And I would urge all aspirants and all students who are on this call to go on to Aditi's pages, skim through. If you have any questions, we will open the floor for questions. So meanwhile, I wanted to ask, while doing the 10,000 pages project with the semicircular cutouts, what was the challenge there, and how was the journey to overcome that? Because when you have a deadline and when you have somebody you have to give it back to, I think the stakes completely change, and your team's cooperation is something that is very crucial at that point of time. So,
Right.
how is that journey for you?
I think it was a very interesting understanding of how the relationship building is also very key to any project that you're doing. So not only I think your team's understanding and cooperation, but also the client's understanding and cooperation for that matter. And how well they are able to receive the challenges that we are facing, which were not predicted before at all. So simple things like, just understanding where the cotton is produced for the paper. That took us really a long time because we were very particular which cotton are we using. What is
kind of hosiery pulp you needed
right.
for the right kind of absorption of color.
Right kind of absorption of color, but also just the journey, right? Because we are talking about such a nuanced, handcrafted journey altogether. The dance form itself is so nuanced. It's so subtle because if you just do this three pataka, whatever mudra that you're creating, it is so subtle, but it means it has multiple layers to it. So we wanted to bring that beauty into the book as well. While when you see on the surface of it, it's just a white and red book, right? We wanted to create a very simple idea. But I think the simple ideas are the most challenging ones to kind of create. I'll go back to that slide because I think I can talk. I can talk about. So like coloring the edges, because the alta that the dancer applies on their hand, right?
Yeah.
That becomes such a signature border for them, for their hands to be defined, their feet to be defined, because everybody's paying attention to those nuances. So we wanted to bring that to the edge of the book, right? That this brings like a certain sort of parameter to live within. That's how life is, right? Of course, just to print, if you see here, this, right, to align it, because we also wanted the books to stand on their own. So to kind of just have a circular structure would not help us like have a book which will stand on its own. To figure that out, how to kind of work with that circular paper so that the book doesn't fall if somebody wants to just keep it as a display piece, right? Then to also like there were so many, unfortunately I think there's no one image where you can see the mudra. I think I missed putting a mudra slide in it. The mudra had extremely detailed illustrations to print them through screen printing. That also was a very interesting challenge on a handmade paper. If you make a acid-free machine-made paper, if you use it, you can get like very interesting results and very similar results, right? But with handmade paper, because each paper is so unique,
it's unpredictable.
Completely unpredictable. So and we are a zero wastage studio. So to make sure that we are not wasting even like one sheet of paper, it was a task.
As a part of my foundation, it was interesting. I took on a project and I screen printed toilet paper. And the whole roll, like rolls and rolls of toilet paper. And I get where you talking about alignment and how the absorption works. So I went on looking at different toilet papers and to find the best absorption, because nobody had ever done it. And the only way to get it right was to explore. So I guess that's where the secrets lie. Just keep trying and trying and trying.
Right, absolutely.
Eventually you'll stumble upon the right idea that suits you the best. But I'll definitely go through the mudras. I'll try to find your work somewhere. Definitely. We have a question from Palak. She wants to know if you'd like to have interns for your label.
So always, you're a very small studio.
Yeah.
So definitely write to me. I think it'll be interesting to sort of have a look.
Is there a process?
I think the process is more. It's more person oriented than work oriented, because I really believe that if you're somebody who likes to work with a community of people, then work can be learned and work can be understood. but I think your attitude needs to be more like community driven and more like on ground, because I think a lot of graduates from design schools sometimes lose the roots where where you have to work with a design community, or where when you work with a team in a professional studio. So it's not say one idea and your idea will like completely translate as you're thinking it, right? There are a lot of like these particulars, the client brief, the team, what is the output, how we manifesting it. So you have to be open to that process and humble enough to understand that you can be wrong. I think that is more important to me than actually somebody with a great looking portfolio.
So if I talk about just three important things as a take back from a social impact point of view, what would those be from your context that you would tell your student self today?
I think like
You've come to this journey through a lot of exploration and through a lot of things, and then you pointed out that there was one moment that you got introduced to bookbinding by a professor who came from outside for just one small module, and that just opened a whole new world for you for what communication is, what book arts is, and so many different craft practices that you integrated along with it.
right.
So what are those three things, and how does but when was it for you that social impact got hooked on to you and sort of latched on?
I think one, definitely to always be open, right? Like being open minded and open to conversations, not to like close any doors, not to sort of like create judgments or conclusions early on, to just be open to learning always. Secondly, I think like, to me, I think what has really worked very well has been to identify micro gurus. So then I have these big gurus who've taught me like the big subjects, right? Like beginning from my parents to like my brother to like my extended family to my school teachers. But like, so, there are people who impact you in your learning journey. And, a lot of times you just credit everything to them. But what you have to also understand is like, dealing with like when you're going out and buying vegetables, for example, can you learn something from the person who's selling the vegetables? And so identifying your micro gurus is very, very crucial. It can open a lot of opportunities for you without you even thinking about it, right? Like you will not assume that I want to do something, or I want to be here, or I want to be like taking this journey on. But how they impact you is very, very deep as well. Third, I think, is to always look at your practice is not an individual practice. Even if you're a freelancer, you always have to understand that somewhere or the other, it's a larger community that you're working with. So you're never alone. So a lot of times, I think designers, when they start their journey, I think they think that they can practice on their own, right? They shy away from teamwork, or they shy away from establishing bigger communities. But I think if you can always remember that employment and education are important pillars, and you can contribute to both very easily. It comes very naturally to designers, because they're thinkers. They're thinkers who think differently. They're thinkers who create differently. So if one is able to sort of work in these two verticals, always keeping these in mind, they can like really slowly, I think you will automatically sort of become part of an impact, which probably when you think and sit and plan, you may not be able to create that impact.
Right. Find people, talk, and then get on to do it.
Right.
We've got another question. Do you plan to expand your expertise digitally too?
Yes, I think technology has been a very important part of my life from the beginning. Like my dad's an engineer, my brother's an engineer, my mom's a mathematician. So science has always been an important pillar in my practice. But technology has also become that third pillar, and of course, like um, where it impacts your communication so deeply now, right? So even if, for example, right now we all are connected through technology, and how can we like not take it, how can we take it for granted ever, or how can we say that crafts will never kind of align with technology, right? My How I'm also planning to sort of take the practice ahead digitally is what we're creating here with this project. We want to create a version of this product digitally, so there'll be more impact and scale to this product than just because, you know, this is a handcrafted limited edition product if I just want to create it at the studio. But the moment I'm able to just translate this idea into a digital product, I'll be able to impact more people. We'll be able to reach a larger scale. And because this is on education, I want it to go to many, many people, right? Many, on many fronts.
I'm saying that I'm glad that we were able to take that message you want to push forward through the learning series. And thank you so much, Aditi. It was a very insightful session. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and being a part of the learning series, and how you've been contributing to create a social impact around you, as well as making sure that it travels across the globe through your communication. Your work's been at MoMA and multiple publication houses and amazing locations that I mean, as an aspirant, when you were yourself, you couldn't have thought that your journey would be somewhere.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much. I am looking forward to, you can also be an attendee in the learning series that are coming forth, and do have a look at all the ones that we did last year also with the 16 speakers. So a lot of veterans doing work in creativity and innovation. Harmonious livability is what we coined for social impact. That, how can we create an environment to live harmoniously? So that is there, and then design leadership as well. So thank you so much. We come to a close for the session, and I would like to thank you once again for being with us and sharing all your immense knowledge about so many different crafts and cultures, as well as practices that you've been doing yourself, and also spreading, especially teaching people who are not from this background, making them unlearn and relearn. I think that goes a long way in terms of where the future lies for these forms and these tools and techniques and our indigenous practices, surviving. Have you also just a last question from my side? You also thought about since you developed a new process to introduce these people to those tools and techniques, and how your technical know-how of you learned from Italy and IIT and other places that you've explored, sort of translated into getting people to understand the same technically, and then translating that into the final outcome. Because at the end of the day, they need to be in line with how you are envisioning it also.
Right.
Have you thought about a book, a documentation of that, in a way that takes that message ahead?
Very interesting. No, not really. And I think that's a very, very interesting take on what it looks like to somebody who's sort of not interacted with my team or my work before. I think I'll keep that in mind. And I think it's how you get trained, right? It is so important. If your fundamentals are correct, I think you can really, then it's up to your imagination to reach where you want to reach. But I think you're right in terms of like how you train, and as educators right now, it is important for us also to understand how are you training the mind, how are you training them to look differently, to look at the problems, identifying the problems, right, and finding solutions on their own. I think that's a very interesting, very, very interesting thought. Thank you for leaving me with that, because I think you've given me things to think about now. And thank you for having me.